Hello, ladies and gents. We're on the module A32. How are empires experienced on block 4? 69. Looking at the introduction. The object of this little book is to tell the wonderful story of our own country. Fewer than 150 years ago, no white man lived in our land. In so short a space of time, by the pluck, hard work, and energy of our grandmothers and grandfathers, and of our mothers and fathers, a splendid heritage has been handed down to us. There is still the remnant of the original inhabitants of Australia, the black fellows, the Aborigines, putting this around 50,000. They live together in reservations which the white man is not allowed to enter. Instead of roaming the wilds, civilization did not begin in Australia until the last quarter of the 18th century. This sort of set of focus story is easily summarised. James Cook first claimed Australia for Britain in 1770 on his first Pacific voyage of exploration of 1768 to 71. A first fleet arrived in 1788 and with about 100,000 British and Irish convicts and Marines in addition to crew. Though instructed to seek amity with natives viewed as nomadic, proliferating farms soon started to push first Australians of coveted land. Free settlers followed from 1813 as farms and sheep and cattle stations pushed outwards from the first settlement. Mid-19th century gold rushes then added lustre to vast developing wool exports, supercharging the population from 221,000 to 437,000. Over 1841 to 51, transportation stopped totally in 1868, by which time self-government was being extended. 6 colonies were federated as a Commonwealth of Australia in 1901. By now, an original 1,000 colonists had turned into nearly 3.8 million, 29 sheep into 72 million. Commonwealth Bureau of Census and Statistics, 1908. A White Australia policy of 1901 to 73 then sought to ensure immigrants were British, or at least European. Up to the 1960s, histories reflected this story of soldiers, prisoners, bush rangers, escaped convicts, free settlers, explorers, unionists, and town authorities as European makers of a new world. It was only after Australia shifted to a more multicultural position from the 1970s to 80s that Aboriginal perspective started to gain space in university history, curricula, and research. So how did first Australians experience this history? Disastrously for them. Naturalist Joseph Banks, who accompanied Cook in 1768-71, described them as savage. Hunters, gatherers, lacking settled government. Then pushed for colonisation, the British government seeking a way of disgorging convicts after losing the Americans' colonies agreed for a pre-existing population now estimated at over 700,000. The result was invasion by people, animals, and new diseases, dispossession, segregation, trauma, and a severe threat to their languages and cultures. In the early 20th century, some British protectors of Aboriginal people even hoped that the Aboriginal population might die out. If those of mixed descent, who they termed half-castes, were assimilated into the white population, the Aboriginal population then defined a half Aboriginal or more, or living an Aboriginal lifestyle sunk to 74,000 in 1933, before a long and a first slow recovery to 800,000 around 3% of the total of just over 26 million at the time of writing in early 2023. Patrick Wolf identifies why settler colonialism is so destructive. Negatively, it strives for the dissolution of native societies. Positively, it erects a new colonial society on the exploited land base. Settler colonizers come to stay. Invasion is a structure, not an event. It has what one Holocaust historian has called eliminationist desire to displace, assimilate, or otherwise remove a society from space it wishes to dominate. In the sections that follow, you will be focused on settler colonialism, impacts on indigenous peoples. In so doing, you will also be looking at possibilities and challenges involved in understanding events from an indigenous point of view. Page 74. Understanding frontier wars and a partial invasion. 3.1. The Mile Creek, 1838, and the Frontier Zone. The plaque of the memorial stone in figure 13.17 reads, in memory of the Waiare people who were murdered on the slopes of the ridge in an unprovoked but premeditated act in the late afternoon of 10th of June 1838, erected on 10th of June 2000 by a group of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians. In an act of reconciliation and in acknowledgement of the truth of our shared history, Nig Ayani Winage Gunanga, we remembered them. In 1980s, you could still picnic near Myall Creek and be none the wiser about its tragic history. Yet since 2000, it has been marked as a massacre site, with annual ceremonies conducted there from 2001. So how did this become an iconic place for frontier wars memory and also a focus for reconciliation? First, what does it commemorate? On 10th of June 1838, 11 men, 9 white convicts and ex-convicts, 1 convict of African descent and 1 free settler, rode into a stockman's area at Myall Creek. Already there were 2 assigned convicts, Charles Kilmeister and George Anderson, who worked alongside Aboriginal people David and Billy. In addition, a group of first Australians had been camping nearby for a few weeks after moving from another station and had cut bark from the stockmen, used, for instance, for roofing. It included 1 woman, a Peter, who visited Anson. The party of 11 plus, Charles Kilmeister, marched off about 28 of them, many being women, old or children, and killed them with guns, knives and swords, several being decapitated. Ipeta, who was also marched off and ultimately killed. The perpetrators later burned the bodies before carrying on their hunt of Aboriginal people elsewhere. The context was preceding Aboriginal attacks on farms round about Liverpool Plains of the North South Wales, where the partial frontier expanded to the 1840s, en route to Queensland by the 1850s in response to Aboriginal action. Mounted police and settler attacks had attempted to drive Aboriginal people away. These attacks may have killed up to tens, if not hundreds, including more than 40 to 100 people at Waterloo Creek alone in January 1838. The result of Myall Creek killings, in sharp contrast to others cases, was 2 trials by November 1838 against the background of Sidney Hevold, outraged that the stockmen were being tried. For one of the stockmen reported the crime, and Governor George Gipps in Sydney, against the backdrop of an 1837 Westminster parliamentary report calling for more Aboriginal protection, supported taking action. A first trial acquitted all the accused. A second on charges of killing different victims. A child named Charlie plus an unnamed child saw 7 convicted and hanged, but the key Aboriginal witness, Davy, was not allowed to testify, as he was not Christian and made progress too slowly when tutored in religion. That meant he was unable to swear an oath on the Bible, a situation that prevented Aboriginal witness in most cases, so the remaining 4 suspects were to let go, while the man who had led the posse, 3 settler and squatters, son John Fleming, slipped away. He reappeared later, living openly as a farmer, a church warden, and even a justice of the peace, so only 7 convicts and ex-convicts have been convicted. Only the second time a man was executed for killing Aboriginal people, the first also being convict. This is in day 2001, page 81 to 82. Crucial to the eviction was the fact that one particular convict, 24-year-old George Anderson, an illiterate London thief in his former life, agreed to testify after discovering the killings were pre-planned. His testimony would send co-worker Kilmeister to the gallows. Sidney Herod of the 5th of October 1838 commented, "The whole gang of black animals are not worth the money of the colonist will have to pay printing the silly court document on which we have already wasted so much time." 1838. This was one of the several articles that supported the accused and argued for more action against blacks as a separate black association, supported the prisoners and encouraged them to refuse to talk. Settler anxieties, fears, and sometimes exaggerations in the face of their Aboriginal reprisals tended to harden views. Whereas some early settlers had to use term savage, suggest more limited tools and acknowledge compared to European norms. By now, some used it to impute negative, violent, ingrained characteristics. Not everyone, however, agreed the Australian was horrified by the massacre. On the 13th of December 1838, it published Eliza Hamilton Dunlop's The Aboriginal Mother, a lament on the eve of the executions of the convict. The first stanza reads, "Oh, hush thee, hush my baby, I may not tend thee yet. Our forest home is distant far, and midnight's star is set. Now hush thee, or the pale-faced men will hear thy piercing wail. And what would then thy mother tears or feeble strength avail?" Why do you think this massacre, but not others, resulted in punishment of the perpetrators? What does it suggest about the limits to any such action? Why does it tell us about the Aboriginal choices in the face of the advancing pastoral frontier? Another way of understanding these events in this, the trial reflected the fact that the victims had come into a station and had been semi-incorporated into the settler world. However, where this had not yet happened, the common sense Unit 3, Settlers Imaginary, and Unit 10's Habitus, and about frontier savage warfare endorsed action acceptable into conventional warfare on more established areas. It would continue to do so wherever frontiers were expanding or the enemy were highly mobile tribes. Aboriginal attacks and rumours might induce fear in isolated stock keepers, and danger of economic ruin in indebted squatters could also fuel along strong emotions of anxiety and fear. These reinforced among some frontiersmen a determination to deny Aboriginal people access to land, drive them off, or after Aboriginal attacks clustered, to have them chased off or killed, including by sneak attack on mixed gender and age groups whose campfires often betrayed them, something replicated in other parts of the world. Therefore, the resulting frontier zone approaches, including using demonstrated force to persuade mobile groups, who did not fight conventionally or have large settlements to move or to submit to European orders, and allowing attacks on mixed civilian military camps. Given the lack of fixed targets, the frontier zone and savage warfare remained distinct characters in imperial and military mindsets. But Aboriginal people came in partial stations, settlers or town fringes, or relocated to reverses, ceased to be frontier dwellers, or could be treated as beyond the law in the same way. Parawa, Parawa, go out, you white buggers. What business have you here? This is reported to have been Aboriginal taunting when attacking John Sherwin's house on the 23rd of February 1830. Frontier violence saw Aboriginal population plummet in mainland Australia. Due to new to them diseases, violence, deprivation of land, and so sustenance and possibly trauma from dispossession, which reduced populations usually ended up on church-run missions, near government ration stations or settlement fringes, or taking work on farms. In Van Diem's land, the result were more terrible. Why? Let's go back to the beginning. Estimates of pre-contact Tasmanian Aboriginal people suggest several thousand in total in 9 nations or peoples, each with the defined territory broken down into tribes, clans into herds of up to 10. Some spent time at the coast to tap marine resources, and also inland where there was more plentiful game as well as visiting each other's territories. The central land interspersed forest and valleys with grassland, and were crucial to what followed. Colonial settlements were established in North Launceston and South Hobart in 1803 to 04. At Risdon Cove near the latter, 3 to 40 Aboriginal people. Contemporary evidence diverges considerably were killed in May 1804 after a large party of Aboriginal people who were hunting kangaroos came across a small European settlement and were fired upon by muskets and a cannon. Settlers' numbers in the area remained modest up to 1817, however, with Aboriginal people initially seeing them as returned ancestors, often the case in the first encounters. In this period, Aboriginal nations could still limit interaction with the core of the settlers, though not the kidnapping of women by sealers. Up to 1817, violence was relative to later limited, with some Aboriginal people trading tea, flour, sugar, glass, and dogs being coveted. A very few groups coming in to the edge of the settlements as tame mobs, and some children being taken with white households. The situation was radically transformed by accelerating settlement from 1817. 2,000 colonists to 1830, 23,500 colonists, masses of men and sheep, penetrated deep into central areas of crucial to Aboriginal hunting, including grazing, formed by practical burning. Such full-scale partial invasion was associated with the clearance of First Peoples worldwide. It was sheep multiplying from 54,600 to 1 million over 1816 to 1813 versus kangaroo pursuits of Aboriginal women for kidnap and rape, as well as abuse of personal partnerships made by agreement. Clements, 2014, pages 20 to 23 to 37 to 53. These combined with prejudice that Tasmanian Aboriginal people, whose toolset seemed core limited than that of the mainland, might be lower on the scale of the great chain of being. Will represent savagery, Reynolds and Clements, 2001. Some colonialists envisioned destruction of the whole community of Tasmanian Aboriginal peoples. This is in Stokes, 1846. Perhaps uprising over 1823 to 30, Aboriginal attacks went from approximately 20 to 259 per year as they switched from selective justice revenge to all-out war. We know they viewed this as resisting settlement because they told multiple colonists as much. Ryan, 2012, page 191. Though abetted by Mosquito, an exiled NSW Aboriginal resistance figure, the key roles were played by Oyster Bay Central Nation people, representing nations under the most intense assault. The Tonga Longata acting as a nodal figure. The settler reaction mixed fear and determination to hit back, sleeping in an isolated hut up to 50 miles from town, especially after others were attacked and mutilated nearby. There's some in a state of terror. Clements, 2014. The local Connaught Times and Tasmania Advertiser was blunt. We make no pompous display of philanthropy. We say unequivocally, self-defense is the first law of nature. The government must remove the natives. If not, they will be hunted down like the wild beast and destroyed. On Sunday last, Mr. Thompson's shepherd was barbarously murdered by the natives while looking after his sheep on the same day as a man was pierced by a spear elsewhere, and soldiers are in pursuit of the savages who have repeatedly said they will, sooner or later, murder every white man in the island, while black Aborigine remains in the Van Diemen's land. There will never be a cessation of their hostilities. Governor George Arthur was committed to equal protection to all. In theory, in practice, no European was convicted for harming an Aboriginal person. And the accelerated settlement policy he implemented implied denying the use of their lands to Aboriginal people. In Tom Lawson's view, the implications of what came to be called the Black War were not just eliminationists, but genocidal. The policy demanded destruction of a way of life. And in addition, the Colonial Office understood this. Arthur and the Colonial Office believed the answer would be the subordinating civilization of Aboriginal people and or movement to reserved areas. But again, Lawson argues the former fits the United Nations definition of genocide since it implied ending a distinct group's culture and way of life. At the least, it meant ethnic cleansing of most of the island. As instance saw in May 1828, a proclamation allowed all natives in the ill-defined settled district to be attacked, and in November 1828, Lieutenant Governor George Arthur declared martial law against Aboriginal natives. This is called, for the first, their expulsion by force from settled districts by whatever means necessary. As Aboriginal attacks continued space, from October 1830, he instituted the Black Line, in which more than 2,200 soldiers, settlers, and convicts, 10% of the colonial population, attempted to drive bands northwards from Hobart. Though it failed to kill or capture more than a few, Tonga Longatiers group, for example, did flee to Central Plateau and in 1831 attacked Dipped by New Year's Eve 1831. Tonga Longatiers band was down to 26, most marked by bullet and sword wounds. They were approached by George Augustus Robinson, friendly mission. fronted by Aboriginal people who had previously come in, and told that if they laid down arms, they might ultimately be allowed to return to their own country with a protective emissary. Within a month, they had marched through Hobart to meet with the governor and were on their way to a Bay Strait island to the north. Clements and Gregg argued that by 1831, Aboriginal people had killed and wounded at least 470 colonists and attacked more than 300 huts. Clements, elsewhere, rather conservatively says at least 306 Aboriginal people were killed, but for certain. Bryan suggests 878. The former suggesting an even more fight, the latter a more one-sided affair. Yet neither figure accounts the full decline over the Black War. If we assume a little less than 2,000 Aboriginal people left in 1824, down to 1,200, it just settled districts by 1827 and in the low hundreds by 1832. Even a larger figure leaves a gap. Some of that will be intertribal warfare deaths and succumbing to new to them illnesses. Little of the latter was reported until later. Some may have been due to increased deaths because of their structural violence. What is structural violence and why is it vital concept in analysing first people's population declines? It relies on the notion that structures produced by policies such as those allowing land seizure and shaping access to state help and resources can play vital roles. They can do structural violence by reducing life chances, sometimes dramatically. If you deprive a people of the land they rely on physically and their identity, it is hardly surprising if their hunger increases and their resistance to disease and illness declines, perhaps precipitously so. Just counting direct killing may only scratch the surface of the harm done. On 26th January 1832, a battle-scarred group of 26, led by Tonga Longatier and Mont Polita, came into Hobart to meet the governor and agreed to lay down arms in return for support and the promise of territory, perhaps even on their own territory eventually to live on. There was just 9 women and a child among them, presumably because resistance fighting had winnowed out many non-combatants. They were soon shipped off to the Furnox Islands of Tasmania, northeast, ultimately being vowed to Bibelina settlement of Flinders Island, where only about 123 of the nearly 300 plus that Robson had rounded up remained by 1835. Many were brought in after meeting George Augustus Robinson's friendly mission, which travelled the island, rounding up the Aboriginal people to ship off to Bibelina. Robson was a builder and evangelical who saw saving and Christianising the Aborigines as a moral imperative and a route to fame and money. Robson was first appointed as supervisor of a station to help the Nuon and on Bunny Island, south of Hobart. In 1829, then as overall protector of the Aboriginal people in 1830. Bunny Island inhabitants included Dr. Wilradi and the teenage Trugani, and whose already traumatic life at the hands of sealers included her mother being stabbed, her sister's abduction, and her fiancé being killed. Stevens 2017 points out that the group asked government in early 1829 for representative to help them, possibly in fear of what was happening elsewhere and due to problems with nearby Europeans being near both of the whaling station with which they had reasonable relations and Hobart with the proximate Risdon Cove. They had time to see the best and the worst outcomes of European interaction. It is possible the friendly mission, which included Borvadi also spelt already. True Gani and others who had come in was as much as their idea as Robinson. Each time a new group was met, the Aboriginal people first went in to do the talking and bring people into a prepared camp. Brodie 2017. He argues their role was critical. How far did they act to save themselves alone? Their fellow Tasmanians as well, and due to trust in Robinson and his evident zeal for his mission.